Good morning or good afternoon or yeah, whatever time it is where you are. It's morning for me, and this is the third video in this series on AutoCAD certification preparation. So I'd like to start out by talking about model space and paper space. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the model tab down here. I'm going to click here. So I have this drawing. It's a site plan or a plot plan. Um, And you can't really see this very well. Let me make this to where you can see that there's something there. That would be helpful, right? Okay, so whenever you do a drawing, you do all of your drawing uh, in model space. That's just the default place where you're working. It's got this black background, and so that's where you normally work. And that you draw things actual size. So if I draw this sort of outline of a two-story house, it's drawn actual size, 44 feet 1 inch and 31 feet 6 inch. So it's actually drawn that size. Okay, so what Paperspace is, or the layout tabs, that's what's next over here. If you click this tab, it's a layout tab or Paperspace. It shows like a piece of paper. Okay, and this is where you would actually have like a border. Like in this case, there's a border and there's some information over here for like an architectural type drawing, and even the title here is already there. And this is all in paper space, and you can see it right here in the status bar. It says paper. That means I'm working in paper space. So I could edit and change and draw just like I do in model space. But here's the big difference. There's a viewport here, and you may not be able to see it because it's just, if I hover over this, you can kind of see it glow a little bit. There, it says viewport. If I double click inside of that, it's like a window into model space. So if I double click the scroll wheel on my mouse and zoom to the extents of whatever's there, I should be able to see something. And for some reason, it's blank right now. So I can see something there. And you know why it's blank? Because I turned everything white. So I'm going to hit Control A and change that. There we go. So this is where you do all your scaling. Now, you want to draw everything actual size, but this is where you would put a scale to it. For instance, let me move my face. There we go. Uh, let's say I think this one was supposed to be 1/16 of an inch equals a foot. And I'm in the model space portion here. I've double clicked inside that viewport, so I'm working in model space. And if I put this to 1/16 equals a foot, and I kind of pan around, and then if I double click outside of this viewport, it goes back into Paperspace. So now I can't edit this floor plan or anything. I can edit the border and all of that. But this is set up to the scale that it's supposed to be. So that's the difference, main difference between model space and Paperspace. All right. All right, so that didn't take too long, right? Model space, Paperspace, layout tabs. That's what we're talking about here. If I wanted to make a new one, I could click here. But for now, I'm just going to go back to model space. All right, and let's start talking about the status bar. It's really important, this thing down here. And so we already saw what this does, model or paper space. If I click on that, it takes me to a layout tab. And if I click on it while I'm there, it takes me into model space. And you can, same thing if you double click inside or double click outside of it. But I'm going to go back to model space and let's see what else is here. So the first two things that you see are grid mode. If you hover over each one of these, you can see what it is. And it's got that little tooltip, I think is what it's called. It says display drawing grid off, grid mode F7. That means if I hit F7, then it will toggle it on. It will be blue, right? And that's the default. The grid in the background, the default for AutoCAD is to have that on. I typically turn it off. I don't use it much myself. Um, but if you do, great. So that's the grid in the background. So if I turn that back off, there's also snap mode, and the shortcut for that is F9. Now, what is this? It doesn't seem like it did anything. Well, I'm going to turn my grid back on too. So there's a grid, and then I've got this on, but what does that do? You can't really tell until you've started a command, like if I start the line command, L and enter, and it's still kind of hard to tell. Let me see. I'm going to pick a start point here somewhere. As I zoom in, I don't know if you can tell what it's doing, but it's kind of jumping from grid line to grid line. So it's snapping every so many units, and we're going to see how many here in a moment. I think it's half-inch units. But if I turn off snap mode, it's all smooth again. Okay, so it's just snapping to certain places. All right, so I'm going to hit escape to get out of that command. All right, so right next to that snap mode, there's a drop down in snap settings. And let me bring it over here. There it is. Okay. All right, so grid and snap, those are the two things we were talking about. Grid is on, and the X direction, the grid in the X direction, that would be left to right, horizontal, and grid in the Y direction, or vertical, or up and down. So it's spaced at a half-inch intervals, and there's a major line every set of 5 half-inch increments, if that makes any sense. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a slightly darker line, lighter line, and then every 5 there's a darker line. That's where you can set the grid up, and it's adaptive in this case. That's why as I zoom in and out, it kind of changes a little bit. The view of it changes some, but then if I turn that off or uncheck it and click OK, that grid goes away. Let's go back there, and so you can do the same thing with the snap. So you can have the grid on and the snap on, but you can change the grid, let's say, to 1-inch increments. And let's say we change the snap to the same thing, 1-inch increments, equal XY spacing, rectangular snap. All right, I'm going to hit OK. So if I zoom out a little bit here, you see how it sort of adapts? That's the adaptive grid working there. If I start a line command and I have these both on, I can see they're both blue. I can not really tell until I really zoom in, but it's going to every 1 inch. And next to my cursor, there's some numbers, 477 feet, 2 inches, 94 feet, 5 inches. So if I move it over, it's just snapping to every inch increment. So that may be helpful to you if you're wanting to work in inches and not go into like 16ths or 8ths and all that mess. You can just have it snap to 1-inch increments. All right. So that's what grid and snap do. That's what these are for here. So I'm going to turn those off for a moment. All right. Continuing down the status bar, let me hit escape here. Turn that off, or stop the line command rather. So grid mode, snap mode, and ortho mode. Now ortho mode is really popular. F8 is the shortcut. So right now it's off. You can see that it's grayed out. It's not blue like this one. So if I click on it, or if I hit F8, it'll do the same thing. Ortho mode is on, and you can see that here. And either ortho mode is on or polar tracking. You can't have both on at the same time. That may be a test question. Okay, you cannot have ortho mode and polar tracking on at the same time. So a lot of people like to use ortho mode, and here's how it works. If I start a line, I'm going to draw straight, horizontal, or vertical lines. That's it. You cannot draw angled lines unless you sort of force it to do so. If I hit F8 and turn ortho mode off, well, then I can draw wherever I want. But F8 again, and it's straight, vertical, horizontal lines. Nice and simple. All right, let me get rid of that. So I don't hardly ever use that. And that's because I use polar tracking instead. And it works in a similar way, but I have a few more options. So I'm going to click on that, and I believe it's F10. So if I hit F8, there's ortho mode. F10, there's polar tracking. Now, here's the difference. If I start a line, it's still sort of snapping to the horizontal and vertical directions. But notice this, as I get close to 45 degrees, it kind of locks in right there. And that's because right next to polar tracking, there's a drop down. I could set this, say, to 90-degree increments. So it would do the same thing as it does in ortho mode, where it was snapping at 0 degrees, 90, 180, 270, and then back. It would, when you see the green dashed line, that means it's snapping in. That polar tracking is sort of snapping in 90-degree intervals. And sorry, I clicked the wrong one right here. So I like to work either in 45 or 15-degree increments. So if we did 15, for instance, every 15 degrees, you could sort of lock in, right? So you could draw a line that's exactly at 15-degree intervals all the way up. 15, 30, 45, 60, you get the idea. So since there's a little more versatility here, I like that. But hey, you can use either one, but only either one at one time. Okay, you can't use them both at the same time. All right, so ortho mode, polar tracking, and tell you what, let's stop there for now. And in the next video, we'll continue working through a few of these things here on the status bar, just so that you are speaking the same language as I am as we move forward. So I'll see you in the next one.